Thank you, Ricardo. I want to tell a story this morning. In 1982, there was a conference in Courchevel, and at that conference, Françoise also came up to me after the session and said, "We have a thesis." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. What is it about?" And he told me that this candidate had done the design of a commercial microprocessor over again as a structured design. In those days, the industry thought that structured design was fine, but the chips would be too big and they'd run too slow. But this thesis had shown that the chip, in fact, was, if anything, a little smaller than the commercial chip and would run at least as fast as the commercial chip. So, of course, I was very interested because at the time, no one had done that. So the commercial people, of course, were poo-pooing the structured design as just an academic thing. Now, of course, everybody does it that way. But so that was really good news, and I got excited about it. And then Francois said, "Would you join the jury?" And I said, well, when is the defense? And he said, "Oh, that will be the day after this conference is over." And I said, "Well, I have a plane flight back home that day." And he said, "Don't worry, we can fix that all up and get you flight out of Grenoble." And so I couldn't resist the opportunity to participate in this historic thesis. So when the conference was over, I drove down to Grenoble and got there kind of late and got checked into the hotel, and only then did I get a copy of the thesis. And so here I was reading a French thesis, which is fine. The French was fine, but there were a lot of technical terms that were different in French than anything I'd seen. So that was kind of fun figuring that out. So I didn't get much sleep that night, but I really enjoyed the thesis. The next day, Monica Obreska got up and presented her thesis results, and absolutely wonderful. And she presented in French, of course, and I asked my questions in English, and that was okay. So then when that was over, the jury retired, and it's a little different than the way it works in the US. The first thing after the jury retired is everyone got a glass of wine and then carefully considered the candidate's thesis. And of course, it was very excellent thesis. And so then we announced the result to the audience, and everybody clapped, and we had a big party afterwards. And that's my most fond memory of François Anceau and Grenoble, and the contribution that they made to the history and progress in VLSI design. If there are students who want some lessons out of it, don't be afraid to push ahead past where people are. If you have something that you can contribute that's people don't quite believe in yet, don't worry, just push it. And that's how progress is made in the world. So best of luck to all of you.
Hello everybody, salut, bonjour. I am Altamiro Susin from Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. Dear friends, let me call you friends as we are jointly celebrating a special person for us, Professor François Anceau. Many people profited from these pioneering initiatives in the early days of microelectronics. Congratulations to the organizers for this tribute, for which I am grateful to be invited. I was in Grenoble at the end of the 70s. At that time, Professor Anceau foresaw the scenery of the integrated circuit design, microarchitecture, design methodology, CAD tools, and prototyping, multi-project chip. It was challenging to research with the lack of literature on this domain. An unconventional method the team of Professor Anceau used to get examples was to reverse engineering of VLSI circuits. Once it came back from the USA with a naked die of this 68,000 microprocessor. I spent several weeks labeling connections on hundreds of microphotographs glued on a board, and I studied carefully the circuit because the architecture fit nicely on my processor model. The relationship of Professor Anceau with other universities, laboratories, and industries gave me access to a valuable information like the specification of the circuit of my proof of concept project. I was invited to help the lab experiments in the microelectronics summer schools to guide participants piercing the oxide and then touching the metal connections of a running microprocessor to see waveforms on an oscilloscope. I enjoyed the friendship of the students and researchers of Professor Anceau's team, and I am grateful for the time I spent there. Returning to my university in Brazil, I followed his footsteps, and I started a group with similar profile. I will always remember him. Thank you very much.
I am Claudio Walter from Porto Alegre, Brazil. Monsieur Anceau was the advisor for my DEA et Docteur Ingénieur thesis from 1978 to 81. He combined intelligence, guts, and kindness. As any scientist, he was devoted firstly to ideas. He wanted to know how things worked, and then he tried to improve them. He had big aims. He tried to help to turn France into one of the world leaders of microcircuit design. He succeeded only in part, because this didn't depend only on his personal effort, but on the way he created a very capable group of specialists who helped France and several other countries on their path to technical and economic prosperity. If we consider the multiplication efforts of the high-quality scientists and professionals he taught and prepared, and those who were in turn affected by them, it becomes clear that the results of his efforts will still be felt for several generations to come. Besides his technical competence, Anceau was a very kind person. Many of us, especially foreigners like myself, will remember his personal interest and that of his wife Paul in the well-being of his students and their families, helping them to feel welcome in a new environment. Merci bien, Monsieur Anceau.
Hi, I'm Professor Philippe Navaux from the Informatic Institute of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in the south of Brazil. It is my pleasure to remember the Professor Anceau's first venue in Porto Alegre. In 1975, we decided to prepare a PhD course here in our graduate course in computer science. For that, the professors, researchers looked to improve they acknowledge by first taking their PhD abroad. In my case, as I have facilities with the French language, I go to the French consulate, which offer two travels for French researchers to come to Brazil. So I write letters to the University of Grenoble and also to the University Paul Sabatier at Toulouse. I received response from both universities, but when confirming their travel to Porto Alegre, George Grenoble answered the letter, and Professor Anso informs that he and his friend Pujula can come together. That was the beginning of the cooperation from Porto Alegre and Grenoble in informatics. In April 1976, Anso and Pujula came to Porto Alegre, and they stayed around 2 weeks presenting talks and courses. Some months later, in August 76, I traveled to Grenoble to take my PhD in computer science, in computer architecture with Anso. After that, other colleagues and students go to Grenoble for their PhD. Currently, I think we can say that more than 100 people from Porto Alegre had gone to Grenoble for their research in computer science. In 1980, a new step started with the first cooperation project, the number 46/1980, with support of CAPES from Brazil and the COFECUB from the Research Ministry of France. That's the history of the start of the cooperation between Grenoble and Porto Alegre, with the important and fundamental participation of Professor François Anso. Thanks very much.